Hey, what's up, guys? This is Stock Retail coming back. I've been kind of hinting at, promising, threatening, doing some numbers review again for quite a while now, and so just finally getting to that. Um, if you're new to this channel, if you haven't been around much, or just a good reminder for anyone, I tend to generally be a DD channel, although sometimes I've got just some encouraging words I like to share. Now and then I might get a little fired up at FUD and kind of go straight at the FUD. Today is just really more of a business update. And so, what I'm going to do for everyone, because this is going to be kind of long to be honest, there's a lot to go through in the numbers, and I haven't done this in a while, so it's just worth going back through and in many ways doing kind of a business health check. Um, but what I'll do is I'm going to jump right to some pretty big punchlines because I know some of you are not going to be interested in a longer video. I know that. And you're not going to want to hear me drone on and on. But some of you will be excited to understand. For me, it's exciting to go through all the details of the business because as I really explore how this business is shaping up on the fundamental side, how much it's improved since pre-COVID, I'm going to show you that. Um, it gives me a lot of confidence and conviction because it's one thing to have people on Twitter or YouTube saying kind of, rah rah, go, we got this, we're going to win. Okay, but it's nice to know, well, what backs that up? What is the thing that actually gives me confidence? Um, uh, the other thing, I guess, if you're new to this channel, is I've got actually two master's degrees in business. I have a background working in forecasting. Um, One thing I always say when I share numbers is there's a saying in forecasting, if you have a forecast, you're wrong, or it's wrong. So, what I'm going to share with you today does not by any means constitute any kind of promise. There's no hopium here. I've always said on this channel, there's no trust me, bros. I'm going to share with you this person's point of view, my point of view, um, based on some industry information too. So, I'll kind of show you how I get there, based on the movies coming, the industry forecasts, a lot of that stuff. But it's still a point of view, and it's my point of view. And so, you're going to have to decide, how accurate you feel this is, whether it's right or wrong, and all of that. So don't take anything I'm going to show you as any kind of guarantee. But what you can take, a lot of times a forecast helps you understand at least the direction of a business. So are there more movies coming? How's the box office tracking? What's the trend? And also we're going to look at expenses too, because we want to get to even just earnings. Adam has said, and I have said on this channel before too, I think what ultimately kills the short thesis is a profitable company and a company with access to capital. So I've talked a lot about that on some of the vote videos, why I believe AMC having access to capital is a big deal. So um, without further ado, what I'm going to do, like I said, I'm going to jump into that punchline, but then I'm going to actually go and tell you, we'll kind of give you an outline of what I'll go through. If Stick around at least to the outline is what I ask, because I am going to kind of hint that there's a pretty big bonus at the end of this, something I think is really important personally. I mean, you can use the tech and fast forward too. So I think for those of you who just want to know, hey, when are we going to have positive earnings? I'm going to give you a point of view right off the bat. That's what I'm about to hit. For those who really want to understand the meat of this business and get conviction from someone who can talk through the details of a business, then stick around, go through the details, and heck, just watch 5 minutes at a time and come back to it or something if it kind of bogs down in a lot of details. And then some of you, I really recommend, actually all of you, I recommend seeing the end of this. So either fast forward or go through with me. Okay, so WEN positive earnings. Let's just jump right to that. And in a minute, if you're one who wants to stick around and get the backup, sort of the, I don't know, proof or the demonstration of how I even get to these numbers, I am going to go through that. So I'm not going to just throw a number at you and then never back it up. I'm going to go back this up, but I know that some people just don't want to watch that long. So I'm just going to jump to the punchline here. First off, you see my point of view on Q1 that we are still in, right? So we don't even have the numbers from Q4. That's going to be given to us in earnings from Q4 of last year. And then I've got a point of view on Q1 of this year. I'm going to talk through in a little while on some movies that changed the dates, other movies that got pulled, other movies that got added. That's something that, the movie industry is fairly fluid, right? So there's maybe a movie that's not tracking well and they need to move it and work on it more, or another movie that's looking awesome and they pull it in. So there have been some shifts in some pretty big movies. That it has included some shifts in Q1. So I used to be a little more bullish on Q1. I gave you all an update, I think in early January maybe, because we were tracking so well out of the gate in Q1. It's not that we're not tracking well anymore. In fact, every single movie is still basically beating my forecast, but there are a couple of key shifts in Q1 that I will come back to. Basically, one movie that moved into another quarter, one movie that moved out a couple of weeks, so there's less revenue in this quarter. But the key to me, I would just think through the year. The year is, to me, what matters. And so we'll talk through that. So obviously those movies are still within the year. So Q1, I see AMC losing about 136 million. That would put it, by the way, at about, I think, the second best quarter since COVID. And so that's still a very positive thing. We're moving in the right direction. If you haven't looked, like the Q1 box office right now is tracking about 50% above last year. I mean, that's a huge jump, guys. 50% above last year. And keep in mind, as I'm about to show you this sort of punchline, Q1 is really always the lightest quarter for movies, and Adam has said as much too. So, I titled the slide here, drum roll, dun, dun, dun. I am forecasting positive earnings already in Q2. I used to say that was more like a puncher's chance and that Q3 was our big quarter, but again, some movies moved around, and that's been the thing I've been holding on to. I've actually known this for a couple weeks. I guess for those who won't stick around, I'll just say, so Haunted Mansion was in Q1 and moved out to Q3, so that was kind of a big one that you'll see here show up in the Q3 numbers. But then Dungeons and Dragons, which I think is going to be a fairly big movie, I'm excited for that one. It moved to the very last day of Q1, and so you might say, oh, okay, bummer, Q1 is a little smaller, but what it did is it rolled those numbers, a lot of its numbers, into then Q2. So outside of the Thursday previews and I think the Friday opening day, the rest of the revenues for Dungeons and Dragons, starts to show up in Q2. So I think that's going to be pretty big. And then there were a couple other things that sort of landed in Q2, or some dates got firmed up on a couple of movies, and some good news there. So now I'm actually saying I believe we may have positive earnings. I'm trying to put that may in the front of that sentence, but I feel much more positive about earnings in Q2 than I even did previously. I used to have it kind of flat, basically. Now I'm showing like maybe even $44 million for AMC. And so that'd be a big deal. And you're going to be able to track that in real time, because just track the box office and how it's going in particular. That'll start in April. So when we get to April, just be tracking those revenues in Q2. And that'll be something I track it every single day, to be honest. And track just sort of movies that are coming in and how those are doing. So that's pretty exciting. And then I actually have Q3, I still have as our biggest quarter. It's gotten a little lighter than it used to be, again, because some movie dates have shifted around and things. And I actually tried to make a couple movies a little more conservative than even I was before. So there's a chance on these. There's always a chance of downside risk in a forecast, but there's also a chance of upside risk. And I'll talk through that in some of these details. And then finally, I have Q4 at a loss right now for AMC, but that's so far out that, a lot can happen between now and then. There could be some movies I don't know about. Perhaps if Popcorn really does well, I'll show you in a little bit what my assumptions are on Popcorn. I've stayed pretty small on that. So in particular, Trolls, you're not going to be able to come at me on that. It's pretty small numbers I've got on Popcorn. So let's say Popcorn does better, or, we saw merchandise selling out. I'm going to talk about merch in a little bit. Say merch, it becomes bigger than we thought. Gosh, he just sold, Adam had that announcement the other day. We sold, 20,000 Ant-Man popcorn helmets in like a day. And that was, I think, $600,000. Get a few more of those and you start to have a little something that you're cooking with. So this is my view on the year. If you don't even go any further, at least now. For a while I had been saying Q3 was the quarter that maybe we turned profitable. I think now maybe Q2 it even already happens. Either way, I've always said Q2 and Q3, you just watch. The box office numbers are going to be the best since COVID. And I think we're about to see that. Stick around for more details. Otherwise, thanks for dropping by. I guess I'm kind of shooting myself in the foot in terms of making any money with you guys watching, but I think you all know well enough to know that's not why I'm here. I'm here to kind of provide information because I believe it leads to conviction, and because I want us to beat these corrupt Yeah, swear words. There's some really bad people I believe we're up against, and the way I think we beat them is we know what's going on, and because that gives us confidence and conviction. So let's go through. I've talked about some of the big shifts. Dungeons and Dragons, I said, moved to the last day of Q1. Star Trek was one at the very end of the year. Star Trek used to be in this year. It's just been flat out shelved, and so that happens. So I had some numbers certainly in the you're looking at these fourth quarter numbers here. Those are impacted because there was a little bit of Star Trek this year, and then as well in 2024. So Haunted Mansion I mentioned moved from Q1 to Q3. I hadn't caught that yet when I shared with you guys in January, so it's just one of those things. You got to keep looking all the time at all these movie dates. And I'm going to give you guys the sources of where you can see that. And then there's a few other titles that I didn't used to have numbers against because they didn't have firm release dates, even though I thought they were going to come in this year. So now, if those have gotten kind of locked down, I've been able to more confidently add some numbers behind those movies. Okay, as we go through the details, I really think it's so valuable. I'm sure some of the folks have already left this video because they saw when the earnings are and that's what they were here for or something. But if you're still here, I'm going to go through and show you how the fundamentals of this company have greatly improved since before COVID, that the fundamentals of this company are better now than they were then. And as movies ramp up, as there are more movies, you saw an announcement from Adam once recently, something like 2023 may have 35% more titles, just more total movies than 2022. And I see that as well in some of what's out there. And so if the fundamentals are improved, and I'm going to prove that to you through their financials, I'm going to actually show you the data, then if the movies start ramping up, my thesis is this is a company that's going to be profitable. And I'm going to show you, let me not jump ahead. So I'm going to go through a little bit about where you can get this DD. I'm going to show you a bit about revenues. I'm going to show you a bit about costs. We'll go through the box office itself. How's that tracking? What kind of blockbusters do we have? I know for some of you, some of this will be a repeat, but it's revised, it's updated, a little bit fresh information. And then going to talk through Popcorn itself and then the earnings. And then finally that bonus at the end. I think I realize it's a little bit of clickbait the way I'm saying this, but I want you to stick around or just fast forward. I believe I've got a pretty important update at the end of this related to earnings, and that for me even kind of relates back to a lot of what we're seeing. So first off, where am I getting all this that I'm about to talk through? So here's an example of like the last 4 quarters. This is actually straight from their filings. So this is a picture of like my local spreadsheet. I take their filings, I literally just type in the numbers into my spreadsheet. You can see I'm tracking the box office, I'm tracking AMC's attendance, then all their revenue, including I get, like how much are we paying per ticket. That's a weighted number. So, depending on what someone pays in Germany versus what someone pays in Norway versus what someone pays in, Mexico versus the US, you get to a weighted ticket price, and then you can see like how much are we spending per person for food. Okay, so all of that, all I'm telling you is I get this straight from their financials, and it's very easy to fact check me. I always say don't trust me, bro. I'll show you at the end where you can get this, but I guess I'll just tip my hand now. So if you go to the SEC Edgar site, you can find all of their financial filings. Look for 10Qs and 10Ks, so it kind of matters on is it a quarterly filing or is it the full year filing. But you can also get those right on the investor relations site if that feels more user-friendly to you. AMC has all of their own filings right there at the investor relations site too. And you can go through, and I'm going to do a video at some point for those who would actually like to take the time and educate yourself on how to read these filings. I'll do that soon, where I'll just go through line by line and just talk about what is this telling you and what are some things you can think about to maybe think more like a business person as you read these financials. But just showing you that I got all the revenue information, all the cost information. So I'm going to talk through some of these things, like for example, film costs. When we buy a ticket to see, let's say Ant-Man is out right now, right? Obviously, AMC needs to give part of that money back to Disney, who made Ant-Man. So there's a cost that AMC has that is basically the cut that the studios take. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why that's better now than pre-COVID, as an example. And, food and beverage, there's a cost to that. So I've talked in the past about how inflation's actually helpful to AMC because we're paying more per ticket, we're paying more for food. But if, for example, if their input costs were tracking as fast as the revenues, then you're not actually making more money. But good news that I'll kind of just reveal to you up front is actually the revenues are going up faster than the costs on most of these items, so that's pretty good. The other thing I've talked about in some old videos, I think if you go back to like last September, that I really would just want to highlight for everyone is think about there's these two different kind of costs. One is called a fixed cost, so like they have rent here, right? So mostly rent is pretty steady, and you can kind of see that. Look at this, 223, 222, 223. So you can see that number's fairly steady. It's just you have this many theaters and you're paying a certain amount of rent on each theater. It kind of just stays the same. The only shifts I generally see are like, I've talked in other videos how they're opening up the Boston ArcLight. Well, I'd imagine, okay, that's a new property. Now you have the rent for that property. There's also been shifts from pre-COVID there because they've closed a lot of properties, so we'll walk through that. But the key thing is, in a time of inflation, if your costs are fixed but your revenues are going up, that's really good. That's actually good for AMC, so that's a big deal. And they are a heavy fixed cost model when you kind of look into their details. So then there's more expenses I've got here. I'm not asking you to look at any of these numbers. I'm just letting you know that I have all of the revenue lines, I have all of the expense lines, I have them all the way back through the beginning of 2019, so all 2019, 2020, 21, 22, and now we'll start rolling into 23. And then I've got these same lines that I forecast out forward. So what I do is I look at history, I look at trends, I think about key changes like that opening of that Boston ArcLight. Okay, well that maybe increases attendance because there's another property. Maybe it increases rent because there's another property. So I can look at their history, I can think about changes they've had, and then I can try to forecast the future. Obviously, it's the movie industry, so the biggest thing that matters is just the movies themselves. Okay, what other information am I looking at before we'll finally dive into some of these numbers? And I just really think it's great if you familiarize yourself with the rest of this once I dive in, because it's just given me so much confidence. The fact that I know their business for myself. I should clarify that with some humility. I know what I can get from numbers and the internet. There's so much I don't know from the inside, and so that's why also my forecasts are going to be wrong on some level, because there's just stuff that the executive team, decisions they're making on expenses, things that could bring in revenue that I just don't even know about. So I'm telling you what I can see in the numbers, but from my review of the numbers for 2 years now, I feel like I have such a handle around this that anytime I see FUD out there, it's really easy to ignore because I just come back to the actual data, the logic, the thesis. And if you're on Twitter, you've seen me say that a lot. Data, logic, thesis, facts. Stick to that because those are the FUD killers. But there's some other things we need to think about. So, how's their cash position? What's their debt? Debt informs their borrowing costs. So we're going to talk through how they've paid down some debt and how that actually then reduces one of their expenses. I've been looking at the domestic box office. I'll show you that. The movies upcoming, industry forecasts. Actually, the euro versus the US dollar and actually some other currencies matters because there were a couple quarters where AMC took a dip in revenues because the dollar was so strong against the euro. And you just think about it, like if we have a Europe ape who goes and attends Odeon in England, and they're paying, in British, the British pound, and then you have to, AMC is a U.S. company, so when they report revenues, they translate that over into dollars. Well, if the dollar is strong against another currency, it kind of looks like you're getting less money over in England. But what happens when that turns back around? So that's what I've got to think about in future forecasts as well, is what's the movement of currencies against each other. By no means am I a currency expert. I just know a little bit about it and can kind of take a swag at that. And then merch. So, we saw it wasn't just these Ant-Man helmets. Like when AMC brought out the tumblers, the t-shirts, sweatshirts, blankets, you guys remember all the stuff that was on the website. And then, Highcroft did the coins that actually have the AMC logo on it too. So I imagine at least some part of that revenue is AMC. Boy, apes are jumping on that stuff and it's selling out. So I'll talk a little bit through merch. I don't have any big assumptions there. It's not like they're going to become, like some huge brand on the merch side. But it's not nothing either. They're selling out, and that's going well. And then the Saudi licensed business, as you guys know. I did a video on that, how even the Wall Street Journal tried to FUD about that. But they've got checks coming in now because they have those open doors over there. And they're getting paid for the use of their name. Okay, so let's talk through those revenue inputs. So first off, if you didn't know, and you probably do know, here's a view. So I mentioned I go back through 19. Actually, I guess I forgot I went all the way back through half of 2018. Um, I'm going to show you on a bunch of these charts what it looks like both pre-COVID and then through now. And so one of the things that I want to just highlight, because all these charts are going to do this, is obviously 2020 was a funky year. And so you can see there's a gap here. I don't have 2020 in the chart because it just kind of drops through the floor and then it makes the chart look terrible. So just want to make sure I'm upfront with you that you can see I've sort of fudged 2020 out of here. It's not in there. So that we can see what I think is a more reasonable kind of comparison and trend. So if you can see, really, in 2018 and 2019, ticket prices were pretty flat. You can kind of see just a little bit over $9 a person. And then you can see, what's this, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Actually, some of these are forecasts. I apologize. So here we go. Like this is kind of the last actual, pretty much. So this is that dip due to currencies. And so we'll kind of have to see where this line lands. But either way, you can see, even if you want to say that I'm a little off, we're way above pre-COVID. So here's that line pre-COVID, if I was kind of like draw that across, and you can see a whole bunch of actuals that are way, way above that line. Even with that currency dip, we're still way above what we were paying pre-COVID. So, next time you see some FUD, just remind yourself, this is an industry that makes the most of its money on us paying for tickets, and we're paying way more per ticket than we did pre-COVID. So what happens when there's more movies? That's going to increase their revenues real fast. So that's one thing you need to know. The other thing is, how much are we paying for food and beverage? So you can see again, kind of the last actuals over here. You can see this little line that's kind of creeping up. I just have it about like kind of at a 3% annual rate of inflation, maybe 3.5%. And we all know inflation's going a lot faster than that. So you can question in these numbers, how you feel about some of what I'm saying. But first off, you can see we were paying a lot more for a little while. People got excited. I think some of this was just, and I know I was, like excited to go back to the movies when we were reopening post-COVID. And so I think I was just buying all the concessions for myself and my family. Like, all right, get some candy, get some popcorn. I'll buy a beer. My wife will have a glass of wine. And, just so we had a lot of fun. But we are still tracking. You can see even with this dip, again, with the currency conversion issues, still way above pre-COVID. So again, as more movies come in, as people are spending more per person, and AMC has more of a, I don't know, kind of almost I guess I'm choking on the word because I don't quite want to call them a restaurant, but there's some properties, mine included, where it's leaning more and more towards being like a restaurant. Like the menu offering is much larger than, when I was a kid, you could get candy, popcorn, and pop. Now there's, pizza and burgers and quesadillas and all kinds of stuff. So there's clearly a long-term trend where we're spending a lot more per person on food and beverage. And so as more people come, because there's more movies, you can see that number is going to go up fast. Other revenue. So I'm showing you a yearly view here, but one of the things that's pretty obvious, again, so first off, they've implemented the Zoom meetings. I don't have really anything in here for that, but it's tiny. I think I probably have like $100,000 a year or something tiny. It's almost like a non-issue. But let's say they have, more of that. That would kind of, in my mind, be in this other revenue. The merch is a big piece. There's a few other things that I kind of lump in here, but you can just see from how, in particular, merch is going that other revenue is tracking better than pre-COVID. Now let's talk about their costs. This is actually a really big deal beyond the revenues because, again, if you get your costs in control, Adam's used the language before, if you kind of heard some of his speeches at some of the movie showings, that maybe pre-COVID AMC was a little bit fat and happy. His words, not mine. And I think he just means, if things are going well for a while, you get into a comfort zone, and maybe you're not thinking about how to continue to sort of strive for excellence, perhaps. I don't mean to put words in his mouth on that, but that's roughly how I translate that. And so COVID made AMC as a business pretty uncomfortable. But I think what he's saying is there's silver linings that come out of that because you work really hard to improve your underlying fundamentals. And it shows, guys. And this is another reason why I trust his leadership, because it's showing in all the fundamentals that, they're getting more per person on the tickets. They're getting more per person on the foods. That was the revenue side. They're getting more in terms of like merch and some other revenue. Well, now look at the rent history. Pre-COVID to post-COVID, it's like a 10% drop in rent. And that's not a small, it's one of their biggest expenses. So if you take your biggest expense and you reduce that, you're starting to keep more money in your pocket, and that's going to show up on the bottom line on earnings. Another thing that kills the short thesis here. How about borrowing costs? So that's another one of their key expenses, one of the biggest ones. Well, remember that he's paid off $265 million just in the last year alone. So here's the kind of the amount that they were tracking for 2022, but actually by quarter it's been going down. And you can see that. So if I go back, let me actually just go back and kind of show you some of that. So here's the borrowing costs. And if I was to show you this going farther back, it's been going down considerably. And then you have to forecast out, because what this borrowing cost that I have, that I just was flashing up for a minute for you, it doesn't have Q4 where he had already, remember he was like refinancing Odeon and he had paid some more down. And then of course for Q1, think about what he just did. He paid off another, I think was it 185 with some of the Antara deal and all of that. And so if there's an interest rate against your debt, which of course there is, then you're making these quarterly payments to manage to pay the interest. And so that's what this is including. There's other things in borrowing costs besides just the interest, but I can confidently, for myself, when they pay down debt, I can already apply into the future quarters the interest rate savings. And so I've done that, and that's why you're seeing then in 23 and 24 this number continuing to track down a bit. And the more that he keeps paying off debt, the more this number kind of will keep coming down. So that's a pretty big deal. And you can see we're pretty much all the way back to pre-COVID levels of borrowing costs. Okay, another really, really big one, maybe the biggest. I think I kind of already previewed this for you a little bit ago. How much of a cut are they giving back to studios? Look at what it was in 2019. It was clear up here above 51%. And then 2021, it was a huge dip, but remember, there weren't as many movies or anything like that either, certainly not having some of those blockbusters. 2022, it kind of spiked a bit. I think you had, like Spider-Man No Way Home and Maverick and some other things. But the reason I'm confident saying it's a little lower now is if I look at some of the quarters in 2022 versus like the earlier quarters versus the later quarters and how it's trending, there's starting to be kind of a pretty steady state that's a little lower. And I had heard rumors as well that studios were, interested, obviously, because they make a lot of money. They would like theaters to be healthy and remain in business. So it's in their best interest to, potentially give a little bit on this number so that theaters can be profitable and stay in business. And then ultimately the studios win because of that. So that number, you can see, is lower by far than pre-COVID, and kind of tracking at a sort of a stable rate right now. Okay, so we've talked about some of their key revenue items, how they're better post-COVID. We've talked about some of their key expense items, how they're better post-COVID. How is the movie industry itself actually tracking? Well, you know that versus pre-COVID, we're way down on the amount of movies there are. I had done, again, another video, couple videos really, like around maybe last September and October. So check those out if you want a little more detail on some of the kind of numbers on this. But the great news is it's tracking upward. Again, I'll go back to Adam's comment that 2023 has maybe 35% more movies than 2022. And I'm quite sure that some of those I don't even know about yet. Sometimes there's kind of some late announcements and some ads that I don't see coming. So the great news is we're kind of trending upwards. Got a ways to go to pre-COVID. But actually what I'm showing you here, and that I kind of walked through last fall, is they don't need the amount of movies to get to pre-COVID levels to be profitable, because they've fixed all these underlying fundamentals. They're not fat and happy anymore. They're lean and mean, in my opinion. I'm sure Adam could feel as a leader like maybe they've got farther to go, and that's great. We want them, as a shareholder, I want AMC, the company, to be challenging itself to continue to improve. and I see that though happening. And so movies trending upward is great. We talked a few times before, besides the count of movies, the really big thing in my mind is how many big sort of tent poles or blockbusters are we getting? And I had done some work before. These numbers might be a little old, but they're still directionally really close. Um, in fact, I think I updated in a slide or two here. Um, you can see that there's far more like $200 million and up type of movies this year. So look at like Avatar, even though it was a 2022 movie, but in 2023, we're way over, in fact, we're well over 250 million even for Avatar. Ant-Man in 4 days just did $120 million. So I had forecast that would be over 200 pretty easily. You can even see there's a whole lot of movies at the bottom here that I'm not even listing their revenue. Sorry, I'm not showing the picture. Sorry, the word's escaping me, guys. What do you call I don't know, the little picture. That's weird that I can't think of the word, but that's all right. We'll keep going. Anyway, so thumbnail. Jeez, couldn't think of that word, thumbnail. All right, so all these pictures at the movies at the bottom, just freeze this screen, look at those. Sometimes people say, hey, you forgot about, I guess this is an old slide, so it still says Star Trek there. Obviously, delete that one. But like the Flash, they showed the preview at the Super Bowl, and that thing looks amazing. Equalizer 3 is one I'm pretty excited about because anytime Denzel is kicking the bad guy's butt, I'm in. Like, I'll watch all of those movies. The Transformers one is looking really sweet and kind of looks like one for us, right? With the ape transformer. That looks pretty awesome. So there's a lot of really big movies that I'm not even kind of showing the thumbnail of. There's that word, thankfully. But the point is there's a lot more blockbusters this year than there were last year. And then if you look out to 2024, I used to have some animation here. I'll skip that. You can see there's a ton more again. And so even versus 2022, we basically get to like there's twice as many. And those big blockbusters, I think they serve multiple purposes, right? Because they, actually, I need to change this. I think Spider-Man moved to 2025. But frankly, it doesn't matter. There's so many big movies in 2024. And like I said, this is an old slide. I think this is one of the ones I did all the way back last September. And that's why there's a few updates that need to be made to it. But the point is kind of the spirit of what you see on this slide, that there's so many more big movies coming. And as the movie industry has seen a lot of success, look at how Ant-Man's going. Look at Avatar being the number 3 movie of all time. Look at how great Maverick was, and Spider-Man, and a lot of even so-called second-tier movies are doing really well. Like look at how big Minions was, and Puss in Boots, and some things like that are maybe more family-oriented, but they're still really big. So the industry is saying, okay, we've proved the model. Like if 2021 was kind of reopening, 2022 in many ways I think proved the model. 2023 is starting to capitalize on that, and then geez, I think we're off to the races from 2024 on. And I'll show you that in the earnings too. So kind of just walk through this. So I'll go through quickly, but if you look at 2022 versus 2023, we get a huge growth in this sort of $100 million level of movies, and then just a little bit more in 2024, but because we kind of established that level. And then same with the $250 million movies, the real big ones. You can see we're getting more of those in 2023 than 2022 by about that same percent, I guess, that Adam said on the whole industry. So 33% growth. And then in 2024, another 25% growth. And even if you just look at, say, the top 30 movies. So in 2022, those were about $5.9 billion. In 2023, you're all the way up to like $6.6 billion. That's a 13% growth in the top 30 movies. And, itself starting to be almost as big as the entire year of 2022. And in fact, in 2024, it looks to me like those top 30 movies basically are as big as what the entire box office was from 2022. I think that's a big freaking deal. So let's look at that box office by quarter. Now you can see a little more detail into 2023 of how that's shaping up and why I had the numbers I had. And just look in particular, let's compare back to 2022. So I mentioned that first quarter is tracking already at 50% above the same quarter last year. And you can just kind of see that here. If you compare Q1 to Q1, we are way ahead. And then compare Q2 to Q2, you see that significant growth and then really big growth. If you remember last year, Q3, that was when, which by the way is why there's some dip in the ticket prices and all that I kind of showed you, and the food and beverage. If you remember, Q3 of this past year we just had, in September in particular, there was almost this like sudden gap in movies. I've described, I have kind of a supply chain background. I've described to people, because of the COVID lockdowns, in fact, have you ever like turned off water to your house or to an apartment? Maybe they're doing a remodel. And when you turn the water back on, there's like these air bubbles that kind of spit through the pipes, and it takes a second to work through. So there's water, and then there's an air bubble, and then there's water, and then there's an air bubble. Well, I think in Q3, in many ways, we hit the Hollywood supply chain's air bubble, because you can see Q2 was great, and that's kind of Maverick and all of that. But then we got to Q3, and there were some great movies at the beginning, but then they kind of hit this like gap where the full Hollywood supply chain hadn't ramped up, and I think they were sort of releasing some movies they'd been working on from pre-COVID, and then they hit this sort of air bubble where they hadn't been able to make enough new movies to fill the gap yet. But if you look in Q3 of this coming Q3, they've filled the gap, and you can just see that. Look at these numbers that I'm projecting. That's again from specific movies that are well, it's sorry for all the animation. It's this stuff. This stuff, I have the timing of like when these land, and then you've got kind of industry forecasts and all that leads me to this Q3 being really big. And so and I've been telling you that for a while, right? Like Q2 and Q3, you're going to see the best post-COVID quarters we've ever had, and just boom, back to back. And then I've got Q4, with a bit of a drop off based on the titles that I see. But here's where I just want to say real loud that that is far enough out. I have a feeling there could be surprises, positive surprises between now and then. And even if there's not, like, I'm not worried about it, because it's more about were we moving in the right direction for me? And as we move the right direction, and as AMC has a clear runway of survival, always keep in mind, it costs shorts to stay in their position. And as they see more and more that AMC is, let's call it viable, it's not going to go bankrupt, it's going to stay solvent, as that becomes proven in the data and they can no longer kind of keep lying to the world about it, then you're going to watch them get in a lot of trouble. So I'm just excited to see these numbers coming. And let's kind of look at what that looks like from a more of a yearly point of view. So there's the actual year, but then one thing I've started to like to look at is what I call a rolling year. So if you look at let's just say the rolling 4 quarters. Like for example, we just finished, this is the domestic box office. If you look at Q1 through Q4 of last year, and we had that little bit of a dip, that's because Q3 was kind of light, and then like I said, the last Q4, you were comparing to Spider-Man. Avatar came out, that was awesome, but it came out at the end of the quarter. And then also the real key thing I saw that I think a few people might have missed is we just had less big movies. We still had a little bit of that air bubble, as it were. Like we had a lot of, say, $50 to $90 million movies, whereas the previous Q4 we'd had some 100 plus. And so it was a tough comparison. But here we are in Q1, and it starts to get a little better in terms of a rolling year. And then look what happens like as we get to Q2, you start to creep up towards an $8 billion year. And then when you get to Q3 and Q4, now we're tracking at an $8.5 billion type of year, which starts to get to kind of some profitability levels, I think, for the movie industry. Now remember, Adam has said, and you can go see this on some websites I'm going to source here in a few minutes, I think pre-COVID, the industry was tracking, there's so many years where it was above 10 billion, and then there's a certain amount of years it was even above 11 billion for the domestic box office. So by no means are we back to the domestic box office being where it was. But I'm really excited about that for 2 reasons. One is, I'm going to show you here more detail about how AMC is going to begin to turn profitable even at some of these levels. I've just told you, I believe, well, actually, I told you at the beginning, sort of that, I gave the punchline away, that both of these 2 quarters which are tracking, well, let's say if you had 4 of these type of quarters, that's about a $10 billion year. Those quarters are profitable, I believe. But as we get up, let's say towards even a $9 billion type of a year, I think AMC is going to be profitable personally. And let's keep going through and kind of why that is. So some of these numbers are a little lower than what I think I showed you earlier in January. Again, there are movies that just flat out disappeared. Like, I'm not counting on Gremlins 3 anymore. That doesn't have a solid date. I told you Star Trek got pulled. So there's a few movies that kind of I pulled some numbers out of 2023. But again, I'm thrilled to see that we may get profits earlier. Can you imagine if Q2, if I'm right, big if, but if I'm right, and when they release the earnings, let's say, I don't know, fast forward in your mind, like it's, I don't know, September or something, when they do, Q2 earnings. Can you imagine an earnings call where Adam says, yep, we turned a profit on the bottom line? Not just positive cash flows, but turn to profit. The pandemonium, the FOMO, the short covering, and I'd like to think it's going to be before that. I don't want to have to wait till September. I know you don't either. The writing's on the wall, and that's another reason I share all these numbers with you guys. Because the more we educate ourselves and then educate the masses to see what's really coming for AMC, then it's just going to be lights out for Shorty, in my opinion. But anyway, so here's the years. So you can see last year we didn't even hit $7.5 billion on the domestic box office. I've said in other videos too, the reason I track the domestic box office is I've got a lot of formulas that I can kind of extrapolate AMC's global revenue by kind of its relationship to the domestic box office. It's not perfect, and I have to tweak it quarter to quarter. Avatar is a great example where Avatar was tracking like more than 2-to-1 internationally. So it was far bigger outside the US and Canada than it even was here. And it was huge here, right? But globally, it's the third biggest movie of all time, whereas domestic, it's not that high. So for these 2 quarters with Avatar, I've had to kind of make some assumptions around the international piece actually being a little bigger and some things like that. But I can use the domestic box office in general to figure out AMC's admissions, like the attendance, and then what their kind of total ticket prices, ticket sales are. So that's why I track this, because it's also just an easier number for me to get to. And you hear Adam quote the domestic box office as well. But anyway, so you can just see the year over year, obviously 2021 being almost nothing, but then from 22 to 23, nice growth. From 23 to 24, and that's a forecast. It's pretty far out, but I'm seeing nice growth there as well. So AMC's specific revenues, now you get into what's their merch, what's their popcorn, what's their ticket sales, how much food and beverage sales. So these are my forecasts. They're going to be wrong, as I've said many times. But, they're based on a lot of history, trends, data, and just hours and hours of my time spent looking at this stuff. And so I'm forecasting about 3.9 billion for 22, about 4.7 for 23, and then about 5.2 for 24. I want to talk about popcorn specifically because I don't want to get trolled on people, just saying, oh, you guys are just spreading hopium and popcorn's not the savior of your business. And I'm going to show you just how conservative I've been. In fact, let's just jump to, so I'm looking at, like in the US and Canada, maybe a $1.5 billion total market, not AMC's business. I'm talking about the market for popcorn. There's different numbers you can get out on the web of what's the market size globally. I think it's actually quite a bit bigger than this, to be honest, like a lot bigger than this. But so you can see that's already a conservative number I'm starting with, unless you disagree with that. And then I'm just saying, okay, what's AMC's market share of that market? And I mean, look, for 2023 as a whole, he said he'd be releasing that soon. I think we're all kind of keep saying WEN popcorn. For 2023, just on the revenue side, forget costs, I'll talk about costs in a minute. I've only got them at 1% of the market. Now, I don't know about you, but if you've seen how fast AMC merch has sold out, what do you think happens when AMC popcorn hits the shelves? I already know I'm going to go buy a bunch of boxes. I know that apes are going to go crazy. I have a feeling grocery stores won't be able to stock enough of that, at least for the first kind of quarter it's being sold. Now, if you're into forecasting, you kind of have to figure there's sort of a launch amount of a product. and then you get to some more steady state after that. Because if some of you crazy apes go and buy 20 boxes of the stuff, I doubt you're eating that all in the first week or two. So there's probably some big launch spike and then some kind of slowdown after. So that's why I've just more kind of counted on a conservative number overall. And then let's be real. I mean, apes aren't the whole market. We've got to get awareness of the brand and other, purchasers like a mom for her kids or a guy for a bachelor's weekend or something. Um, they've got to see that the AMC brand is out there and start to buy that. So it'll take time to build up market share. And then you can see I've got some growth for my own numbers in 24, but still only 1.6% of the market. So, you might say, oh, these numbers here seem kind of big, but if you look at it as a percent of the market, I've got it real small. And then I hope that I was conservative with margins. There actually is some DD behind this. I saw kind of an AMC hater once, I think this was before the holidays, maybe or around the holidays, who was trying to tell you all, like, you can't even make money on popcorn and whatever. So I went and looked. I think the company's Conagra. I'm trying to remember, who owns Jiffy Pop and, Smart Pop and Blast-A-Butter. There's different brands. I looked at a couple other companies too. And I found their margins in their financials. It's published. And so this is, again, why I tell you guys always do DD. I mean, I just went and found it for myself. They had it lumped in with other snacks. And so I think popcorn's actually a better margin than what I saw in there. And then the other thing I'd like to think, and maybe I'll try to get to the AMC Ideas group or get to Adam on this, is I think AMC could probably sell us their popcorn direct. And when you sell direct to consumer, you get to keep more of the margin in-house. So if they sell some in the theaters and you just grab a box on your way out when you've gone to see a movie, or if they also just sell some online and can ship it to us, I have a feeling their margins are going to be pretty good. So the margin I saw for popcorn for like Conagra and some other companies like that is just a touch lower than what I'm showing you here. So this 35%, what I'm saying is that's how much they would keep. But I believe AMC can get to this and maybe even beat it, especially if they sell direct. So that's why I kind of counted on that number. And then that just gets you to your net earnings. So you just say, all right, here was the revenue. They're only keeping this 35%, and here's their earnings. So for the whole year, as I show you the earnings numbers I have, even if you wanted to just, either you're respectfully disagreeing with me or you're a troll and you want to come at me, just take these numbers out and you'll still see that we're improving leaps and bounds and the short thesis is dead. I could zero these numbers out and the short thesis is still going to be dead. So that's why I don't mind just showing you my numbers and having you poke at it. I don't care. Take these numbers out. It's still going to show. A few other thoughts, and then I'm finally going to show you just kind of sort of the bottom line on yearly earnings. And then I'm going to get to that bonus point finally. We're rounding the corner here and heading for home a little bit. Okay. If you haven't thought through before or you haven't heard me talk about it, the fact that AMC owns Hycroft stock means that's on the books. And there's some treatment of how that kind of shows up in income. And the example I've used before, if you remember, it's escaping me the name, but when Amazon owned a stock, and I think Rivian, when Amazon had Rivian, I hope I've got the right company there, and Rivian stock had like shot up. And then there was one quarter where Amazon's earnings were actually not that great, but they ended up looking really good because of Rivian's stock price and the fact that that showed up in Amazon's earnings. Basically, there's kind of a sort of a book value to the improved price of the stock that kind of shows up in your income. And so if Hycroft finds gold, if Hycroft finds silver, lithium, starts to improve the operations, if Hycroft stock moves up, now it could also be the other way if it moves down, but I'd like to think it's somewhat at a low. I feel somewhat bullish on Hycroft myself. If Hycroft stock moves up, then you're going to see that be upside. And I counted on just a little bit, but I counted on so little that I really think there's upside to my forecast on that. I don't have any thoughts in here about mergers and acquisitions. We're in the middle of this conversion vote, and you've heard me say we're giving Adam access to capital. If the vote's a yes, well, if he uses that to merge with a studio or buy a whole bunch of a competitor's properties or do anything else that creates a lot of new revenue, then that's upside. I don't have anything in here for that. I mentioned no assumptions on the Zoom business. I guess that's not entirely fair to say. I think I have like $100,000 a year. But that's, I worked at a company big enough that you call something like that a rounding error. And I think you would do that here with AMC too. If you look at their total revenues, 100,000, that's just like, they sold $600,000 of the popcorn helmets for Ant-Man in one day. So if it bugs you, take a 0.1 out of here on the earnings. Just like I said, you can kind of take these popcorn numbers out, just add a 0.1 to both of those and take that out too. And then I do have some small assumptions on the direction of currencies, but I'm not a currency expert, so I'm not trying to do too much with that. I'm just thinking in general, recently we may have seen some lows for the euro against the dollar, and then hopefully that improves by percentage points, nothing big. So here's the earnings on the year. So you can see this was 2019, 21, that's a tough year, right? So if you don't you can just see here what Adam had to lead through. And so the people kind of going at him, I don't know, I get a little tired of it, to be honest, because the fact that this company's not bankrupt yet tells me everything about his leadership. Just look at these numbers. And even 2022, which was greatly improved. Of course, I've got a forecast for Q4 in here, so that includes that. So this number is already going to be a little bit wrong. Once we get that Q4 number, I can actualize this. And then I think, look at this though, I think this year, based on all the forecasts I've shown you, that AMC basically gets back to pre-COVID. So look at that. They were at minus 149. I believe they're getting to minus 151 for 2023. And if some things break right, like if merch is bigger, I kept merch really small, guys. I'm having a hard time believing, yes, we sold out. Yes, we bought a ton, but it wasn't 6 million t-shirts or 5 million mugs that sold. I'm sure it was some smaller number, and we're going to start to find out because we're going to hear about that in the earnings. And so wouldn't it be awesome if I'm wrong? Like maybe you feel more bullish than I do on merch, but either way, I've kind of kept that small for now. So let's say that's bigger, or like I said, if Hycroft moves, there's a lot that could happen this year in this number, or if some movies surprise that I don't have. Like I had nothing for The Whale. It's been like, I think we're around like a $15 million movie on that one. And yeah, 15 million is not huge, but if you get a few of those, and I've got pretty much zeros, or I think I had, $2 or $3 million for that one. You start to get some upside surprises on some movies, or if AMC sells more food and beverage or something. I'm just saying there's a lot of unknowns in this number that could move it and could be awesome. But either way, I've got us forecast to basically hit pre-COVID levels already. And then you can see in 2024, I'm already believing that that's a full year of profits. So it's a little less bullish than what I shared at the beginning of January. But again, I've explained to you there's some movies that moved out that were fairly big. And so that's kind of impacted that. But this is, to me, this already kills the short thesis. In particular, if you think about how much cash the company has and where the earnings are moving, I just think it's over. Here's the bonus. We're finally there. And I think this is a big freaking deal. So, first off, nowhere has Adam said he's going to pay off debt if we have a yes vote. I'll just acknowledge that up front because people like to hit me with that one every time. So, fine, I'll give you that card. He has not said, if you vote yes, I'm paying off debt. But I'd like to know what would happen if we woke up one morning and he had used the capital dilution, there's that word, right? But if he had used that to pay off debt. So here's all you got to do. Just take their interest payments that they're paying every year and basically add that back to earnings. So anytime you don't have to write a check out the door, that I told you, that's money you get to keep in your pocket. And I showed you way back at the beginning, rewind this, what their borrowing costs were. It's one of their biggest expenses. Imagine as a business, you just wake up one morning and they've announced that they've wiped out basically their biggest expense. So what does that do to earnings? So I just told you that in 2023, we're losing money still, but we're getting real close. And the cash flows are going to look great on that. I think I forgot to include one other slide that I meant to. Something called depreciation and amortization. So there's some costs in here in their numbers which are also not cash related. So I'll explain in another video because we've gone long already here, but there's a way to have positive cash flows even before you have positive earnings. And ultimately, that's what Shorty's really watching. Like, is AMC going to be able to generate cash for itself? And there's some expenses that are non-cash expenses. So you're just kind of writing down some assets basically, and you write that down as an expense. But if cash is not going out the door, you understand that's not impacting your cash flow. The reason I mentioned that here is uh, basically I'm showing you the earnings. I'm not showing you the cash flow. Cash flows are going to be even better than what I'm showing you, is effectively kind of what I'm saying. But when you fix your interest payments, when you remove those, that's absolutely a cash related item. They're having to write a check to whoever's holding their debt to cover the interest. So what happens this year if we wake up and he says, all right, we're not paying any more interest? Boom. We have a positive year. The entire year is positive earnings. Not just positive earnings, but obviously very positive cash flows to the tune of $125 million. This is not accurate, like I said. I mean, first of all, we're part way through Q1, so he'd have some interest expenses that would eat away at this number. I've kind of done this for the full year. And again, this is a forecast. You know, what's accurate is I know what their borrowing expenses are. That I've got the actuals on that. I'm just saying there's a lot of other forecasts in this number. But take the spirit of what I'm saying. Imagine the idea of removing, like, I don't remember the exact number, $280, $290 million a year of expenses. Just poof, it's gone. It's a big, big deal. Maybe 270 million, something like that. And then for 2024, another significant jump. So you get the idea. Like, another reason I'm a yes vote and why I'm not scared of dilution. If we wake up in the morning one day and he says, I've wiped out debt, and everybody does the math on the fact that, holy cow, AMC is already a profitable company. It's just over, because at this point, they're surviving forever because they're making profits, and it costs shorts money to hold their position. Let's keep coming back to that. Look at that cost to borrow. Have you guys seen like what Fidelity and Schwab and E-Trade are offering now? It's over 80% yearly. That's insane. These guys are burning cash to hold their position. So that's why I'm excited, and that's why I'm a yes vote. I've talked to you guys about that other places. I won't belabor the point. But whether you're a no vote or a yes vote, just understanding that if he wipes out these interest payments, AMC is already a profitable company. They're already there. Now, that's opinion. That's my forecast. So question that. Do some DD. Speaking of DD, here's where you can go. I've shared these before, but just in case you're new to my channel, so where I get the financials, I mentioned the SEC Edgar site. It's just like the name. Google that. And then there's a way to do a company search in the SEC Edgar site. So you just look up AMC and you can find every filing they have. That's where some of us go. And we, if we talk about a proxy filing, or we talk about, how many shares Adam owns. I've got a whole video on that. Well, I got it from filings on the SEC's site. Those same filings will be on the investor relations site. So if you just prefer to use AMC's website, you want to go there to get your filings, you can do that. And they'll look a little different too. There's a little bit of different kind of user interface on the SEC versus AMC's site. So you can kind of just decide what you like. But either way, you can absolutely fact check all the history on me. The forecast, that's my point of view. But you can fact check the history very easily. And then, so movies, forecast, box office. I'm just giving you a few websites. I actually use a lot more than this. And then frankly, I've tried to tweak over time and come up with my own forecasts for some movies. And I'm getting fairly good at it. I'll share at the end of Q1 what my accuracy was. So far, basically, if you go back to the January video, we were tracking way ahead of my forecast. But because some movies have moved back out again, now we're basically tracking just a little bit above my forecast for Q1. Anyway, that's probably sometimes it's better to be lucky than good kind of a thing. I'm right because I was wrong. I know that makes no sense. I'll explain it sometime. Anyway, so you can go to Box Office Mojo. That's where I track daily the movie revenues, the domestic. Well, actually, it's got international as well if you want to check for your country, if you're in a different country. It's got the worldwide numbers and stuff too. Just like I said, domestic's a little easier to track. And there's a way in there, maybe I should just show you sometime. If you get to a certain view, you can even track within this quarter how's each specific movie doing. And so I get all the numbers on that and I update those daily for myself. And then if you go to movieinsider.com, that's where I'm telling you, you can look at every movie that's slated for release and kind of by the date as well. That's where I'm getting all these dates of these movies. I'm finding sometimes that misses a movie or two here and there. In particular, some indie movies, or like we're getting some of the anime movies, from Japan, and some of those are, 10 to $15 million movies as well. So you'll get almost all the list, but you want to just kind of dig across the internet too if you want to maybe just see some other movies that might be coming out. And then finally, on Box Office Pro, that's a nice place that has some forecasts. Again, I end up coming up with my own. You can get forecasts on IMDb. You can get forecasts, I think, sometimes on some other Hollywood sites that I've used. But generally, these are kind of the three I look at the most. And then on Twitter, I like to track. There's a couple accounts that like to just give the daily updates as well. So sometimes I can see their numbers before it shows up on these other websites. But just wanted you to see, like, honestly, from this, you could learn AMC's financials. You could learn the entire list of movies coming. You could learn how movies are tracking. And you could learn what the industry is forecasting against those movies pretty quickly. And in that way, sort of question whether you even agree with my forecast or not. I think ultimately, it's pretty simple. AMC has improved its financials. The industry is investing in itself. There's more movies coming. There's bigger movies coming. And a company that's improved its financials while the industry it's in is improving is set for great success. So let's go.